Okay, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to our March 8th first in-person meeting since February of 2020. So we're pretty happy to be back together, especially for those of you who are here live. And we're still grateful to have all of you online with us today. I should stand here so you can see. You're missing the prime rib. That's right, you missed the prime rib and the sea bass. We've learned a lot during this pandemic, about how to communicate and network in the virtual world. But we are not going to lose that knowledge. We want to, continue to use it, and the live streaming tonight is part of that. We tried to experiment with that before the pandemic. It didn't work out very well, but I think we'll be working out. It'll work out much better now doing the live streaming as well as the in-person. And we're talking on the board, we're talking about some additional ways to engage the members throughout both counties, Miami-Dade and Broward. Let's know more about Section 1510. I think you all know by now, most of you know by now, check the myasq.org website and go to the communities tab, and then you have to do a search for our section for Southeast Florida. I believe you can do a geographic search. There's different ways to search, and you'll be able to find us there. When you find us there, you can look at events. You can go into files. So for past meetings, if you've been to past meetings and are looking for the RU credits and the validation, you'll find the files that are there for that as well. We also have a LinkedIn group. I think probably most of you know that. But if you're not a member of it yet, please go ahead and join that group. We also publish all the information about the section through the LinkedIn group as well. This is being recorded tonight, and we will upload this to our YouTube channel. Like we have been doing normally for the last 2 years. So this will be there, and Bob has provided us a PDF of his presentation tonight, so we'll have that as well that we can post. I think in the ASQ.org or the LinkedIn. I'm not sure where we actually put that. It'll be on the MyASQ. It'll be in MyASQ website in our files there as well. Okay, you'll also receive a verification of the RUs for tonight. And whether you're online or in person, you'll get the verification email, hopefully within just a few days. Okay. For those of you who are online, if you don't mind, please just keep your audio muted until we open up for questions during the presentation. I would like at this point to introduce Steve Kramer, our chair, to welcome you all and say a few words.
Yeah, well,
right here, Steve. Right here, Steve. Up here.
So welcome everyone, live and virtually. It's so great that everyone's finally back, seeing each other in person, and we'll keep doing it this way because we want to encourage all of our members to come out and actually, see each other, shake hands, all that good stuff. But also, we want to get our members that can't be here because of whatever reason. So it's important for us to reach out and enable all of our members to engage with the sector. So we're glad everyone's here, and we're always looking for great suggestions because you're all improvement people. So you're going to say, oh, well, why don't you just do this? Well, just tell us, okay? We'll pretend that we thought of it, and we'll use it, and we won't give you credit, but we will use it. So that will be good. So we're glad to see everyone here, and we hope these meetings will keep getting larger here and wherever else we have them. We'll have them sometimes down in Miami also. So we'll have them here, and it's good to see everyone and welcome.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, we want to welcome those members of the student chapter here as well, 1510 student chapter from Nova Southeastern. Welcome. Okay, so at this point, then we'll get into our program. I'd like to introduce our speaker and the presentation, Learning a Strategy for Achieving Excellence. Our speaker tonight is Robert H. Seymour. Bob, as most of us know him. He's the Chief Operating Officer and Training Officer of ETS Incorporated, which is a Florida-based consulting and training firm, which is right here in Weston, or not far from here in Weston. He's a leader, engineer, and innovator of practical approaches that drive organizational excellence. Areas of specialty include organizational assessments, strategy, process improvement, re-engineering, and innovation, and measurement systems. His experience in the application the application of industrial engineering and Lean Six Sigma approaches for more than 45 years. His clients have included AT&T, Chase, Siemens, state agencies, and school districts, and not-for-profits throughout not just in the state, but even beyond the borders of it's a prolific Lean Six Sigma trainer and consultant, and has trained more than 50 green belt and black belt process improvement teams per year, or for the last 31 years. All of ETS Lean Six Sigma and leadership courses are accredited by the International Association of Continuing Education and Training and the American National Standards Institute, ANSI. ETS supports the Sterling Council and the National College Performance Excellence Program through course development, training, and consulting services. Bob's a graduate of the Georgia Institute of Technology with a bachelor's degree, and also with an MBA from the Florida Institute of Technology. He's earned the application expert for total quality management certification from the Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers in 1988, and he's a Six Sigma black belt, master black belt earned in 1990. Bob's presentation tonight is Learning, a Strategy for Achieving Excellence. In this presentation, Bob examines the value of learning and embedding knowledge in any company. Learning is the acquisition of new knowledge or skills through evaluation, study, experience, and innovation. Learning can and does occur both at the individual and the organizational levels. Bob has facilitated and observed real-life learning in his work with multiple teams across many organizations. He provides a review of key learnings from Lean Six Sigma green and black belt teams. He has engaged using the DMAIC, the Define, Measure, Analyze, Improve, and Control methodology. He will discuss and share strategies appropriate for promoting learning in any organization, including yours. So with that, please join me in welcoming Bob Steamer.
Thank you, Bill. That was a pretty lengthy introduction. I don't think I have anything left to say. You know, when Phil first contacted me just before the holidays, he asked me, do you mind speaking? So I'm in the middle of reviewing feedback from all the classes we teach every year. Because once a year we update all the manuals. So, yellow belt, DMAIC, green belt, black belt. So I'm thinking, what will I talk about? And basically, it just kind of hit me. Doing this feedback because I need to learn, modify the material to make it better, right? So here's learning. So then my next question for Phil is, hey, Phil, what do you folks wear at these chapter meetings? You've been Zooming for the last 2 years. He said, oh, just wear whatever's appropriate. So I did like Rick does. I showed up early with my pajamas and my slippers. And fortunately, I had a change of clothes in the car. All right, so I'm a management consultant, do a lot of training, as you can imagine. And as Phil said, you know, we do about 60 to 70 green and black belt projects a year with students, going back over about 31 years. So, you know, when you do so many projects, diverse projects, you see how these tools and techniques apply to any situation. Let's have a good discussion with the table over here. And, I think Amy said, what kind of projects do you look at? I said, well, you know, we have a typical class, might have an animal shelter team, a stroke patient team, very diverse. But what I'm going to share with you today is these tools apply to any kind of situation. So with that, I think all of us have one thing in common. That's, you know, we're in business to improve our businesses. The way we do it is with systematic tools and techniques. I was first introduced to DMAIC back in probably the late 80s, but we were utilizing a technique from Japan called the QC story, which Rick and a couple others are pretty familiar with. So what I'm going to share with you tonight is a version of DMAIC based on the Japanese model of the QC story. But through learning, by learning, we learn how to improve. If we're not learning, we're not improving. So what's the definition of learning? What do we mean by that? It's basically just acquiring new knowledge. You can get it in a classroom. You can get it from experiential experience, observing, managing with data. Learning is used with the Baldrige or the Sterling or even the European Foundation for Quality Management, their systems as a that they use to evaluate the growth and the effectiveness of an organization. Now, how many folks here are familiar with Baldrige? So Steve, got a couple. So if you think about Baldrige, they use a system called ADLI, which is, they evaluate the approach, the deployment of the approach, the learning that goes on, so you can improve on your approaches and integration. So even with Baldrige, learning is a key element in the evaluation of an organization's growth and effectiveness. Now, each year we probably train around 2,000 people that go through Yellow Belt, DMAIC, Project Management, Green Belt, and Black Belt. So they go through the entire curriculum. What's interesting is only about 82% of these people are not comfortable with statistics, don't know much about Six Sigma. So, they're kind of like babes in the woods, coming into this program. And as you know, it can be very intimidating. Some people, when they hear the word statistics, they want to run somewhere. And so it can be intimidating. So how do you convert 82% of those people through the program and have them complete a successful project and really feel like they benefited themselves and their organization? So one thing we do with the Six Sigma teams is we make sure they're aligned with their organization strategy or the leadership team's KPIs. So if it's important to the boss, then that project will get some visibility and some support. So we try to make sure that all people coming into the program are focused on a process that has impact on their organization, link back the results to the benefits for the organization. Teams represent all sectors. So when I said earlier that these tools apply to any field, I mean, right now, we just finished a project with an animal shelter trying to reduce the euthanasia rate of animals in the shelter. So you're saying, how in the world would Six Sigma do that? Okay. And hospice, hospitals, stroke patients, babies' milk delivery, you name it. These tools apply to anything. Now, back when Rick and I and Phil first started, you heard the word Six Sigma, everybody associated it with manufacturing. In fact, I was in a meeting about 2 years ago in New York City, sitting next to some financial analysts. They said, so what do you do? I said, well, I do a lot of consulting and training. Have you ever heard of Six Sigma? I said, oh yeah, I've heard of that. He said, yeah, is that kind of what you do? And I said, oh yeah. He said, but that only applies to manufacturing, doesn't it? So while the teams are diverse, though, they share a common element. That is, they want to improve the organization they work for, and they want to develop professionally. Now, most of us are familiar with the DMAIC, and about 78% of the work we do with project teams utilizes the DMAIC. We also use DMAIC, which I'm sure you probably have heard about, but DMAIC is the most frequently used. So the lessons I want to share with you tonight applied mostly to the DMAIC. Now, the interesting thing about DMAIC, now, all of us here, we want to improve quality, and by doing that, we reduce variation and deliver consistency, right? But did you know that there's really no standard for DMAIC? So there's probably about 2,000 versions of DMAIC all around the world. So there is no standard. So the version we use is based on the QC story, and it was first used in Japan, documented use in the late 50s. You'll probably notice a small difference between what I'm going to share with you now and maybe a version that you're using. Now with ours, we've broken DMAIC down into mini steps. Okay, so DMAIC is 5 steps, and each step has 5 to 8 milestones, which we call checkpoints. And these checkpoints all are very specific deliverables. And we evaluate each checkpoint using a Likert scale, very similar to the Hadley model that's used in Baldwin. Right, so when we grade a project, we grade it very rigorously using the 33 checkpoints. Now, the interesting thing about grading hundreds of projects year after year is you can develop a database by checkpoint. So if each step has checkpoints and you're evaluating each checkpoint, then you can start analyzing what are the strengths the teams have and what are the weaknesses they have by satisfying each checkpoint. So that's where we get our data to help us refine the materials and deliver it more effectively. In fact, during the pandemic, as we transitioned from classroom to virtual, you know, like all of you, we had to do that on the dime. But analyzing those checkpoints enable us to say, how are we going to deliver this stuff virtually and still be effective? Now, the term ETS, we call ourselves ETS now. But in 2001, when we created ETS, it was called Electronic Training Solutions. Right? So the goal then was teach Six Sigma online in a self-paced learning environment. So we invested heavily in software in a system called Blackboard, which some of you probably heard of, used a lot in universities. And we were the largest provider of online Six Sigma training in the Southeast for about 4 years. And then about 2005, I'm looking at the statistics, I just had some Marines out of California started with the Six Sigma course and they dropped out. I'm thinking, you know, making a lot of money, but we have very high dropout rate. Maybe online learning with Six Sigma just isn't the way to go. So in 2005, we went back to the classroom. 15 years later, here we are with the pandemic. And now we're finally living up to our name, Electronic Training Solutions. Right, so we've kind of gone full circle, but this time it's not self-paced online. It's instructor-led virtual. And I think you'll know that there's a big difference with that kind of training. We divide DMAIC into 2 groups. The first part is problem solving. So problem solving gets us to the root cause, because you can't make an improvement if you don't know the root cause. So with problem solving, we go through define, measure, and analyze. Once we've got the verified root cause, then we can create the countermeasures and the solutions, which now gets us into the project management world. So 7 or 8 years ago, I'm analyzing these teams. And I'm saying, you know, why do some green belt and black belt teams fail? It's not because of the analysis. Everybody knows how to do root cause analysis, verify root causes, utilize the different techniques. So if they're coming up with the root causes, why are they not being successful? Because they don't know how to implement. So about 7 years ago, we created a project management for Lean Six Sigma course. With that, success rate of green and black belt teams has increased dramatically, as well as the ROI. It's now what they're doing is they're able to convert more of the gap and the costs initially into benefits on the back end. So we basically taken the DMAIC and made it a model for managing through it. Okay, so what can we learn with the DMAIC? What have we learned as a result of looking at so many projects over the years? So what I'm going to do is I'll give you a DMAIC step-by-step flow of common weaknesses that teams experience and ways for them to address those problems as they utilize it. So in the define step, what happens in define? Well, in define, you're building your business case. You're trying to establish the reason why this project is more important than others. Why would anybody need to improve that process when we have so many other processes that need work? So in the define step, you're building your business case. And one of the problems that teams have is they don't get full leadership support. And you've probably heard this, you know, leaders don't support the improvement. Missing or inappropriate key performance indicators representing the stakeholders' need. So sometimes teams don't really understand who the recipient or the beneficiary is of their project. So they don't show the connection between their project and the leadership dashboard. So poorly defined reason for improvement, utilizing an incorrect measurement right up front. So maybe they say, well, we have a problem with staffing. Okay, so how would you measure that? Well, you know, we don't have enough people. Okay, so is it a vacancy issue? Is it a retention issue? Is it a hiring issue? What's the problem? So you get the team to think through what's the key outcome that we're not achieving right now. So at that point, that's where we convert to a hard measure. Then inadequate team diversity. And by diversity, I'm not talking about ethnicity or race. I'm talking about skills. So you might have let's say you have a human resources department working on a process that's going to affect operations. Well, maybe we should have operations on the team. Okay, so many times these projects, they come up with great results and they can't get them implemented because they get too much resistance. The resistance wasn't part of the team. All right, so what can we do about these issues? Well, one of the requirements we have on any team, green belt or black belt, is that team needs a sponsor. And that sponsor needs to have a organizational connection to the leadership team. Okay, so Jobin, if you're a manager, you're a team leader, your director will be a sponsor. The director usually reports to a VP who's at the table. So Need a sponsor. Need to develop an appropriate measure of success for that process. So what's the outcome? Quality, cost, time, safety, environmental impact. What's the measure that the process is going to improve? And how does it align to the KPI dashboard of the leadership team? This is a very important one. Wherever there's a gap between the actual and the targeted performance, there's a cost that the organization has to carry as a penalty. So that's called the cost of poor quality. So for every project, every process, the team has to calculate the cost of poor quality. Right now, I've got a class of 6 teams. They're all from a very large university hospital here in Florida. And those teams have an average of cost of poor quality of 1.6 million per year. It's one of the better health systems in the nation. 1.6 million per year, just from those 6 teams, each team. So this is important. So you can quantify the performance with a performance measure, but then you quantify the financial representation of that gap. When leaders see the financial impact of the gap, then they get interested in your project. If you only showed them the performance measure, they might say, well, you know, we've been at that level for several years. I guess we can live with it another year. But then when you say, yeah, but you know, that 1.5% difference in average patient length of stay is $47 million a year. Then they want to improve. So cost of poor quality, extremely important concept. It's a way to measure success in any team. And make sure that the team is focused with a SMART theme statement. So basically, you're going to tell the world, what are you going to do to that theme indicator or that performance measure? Now, in the measure step, that's where you take that performance measure, break it down into its elements. So you're going to stratify and analyze the process that's producing that performance measure. So where do teams fail? Well, one of the problems teams have is they really don't understand the process, their process. So they might do a cursory flow chart or maybe a Gemba walk, but they won't really understand the process that's producing that performance measure. So this is a common weakness. Insufficient data collection. We were talking about data collection over here at this table before the meeting today. And you know what's interesting, one thing I've learned over the years is organizations collect tons of data, but organizations typically have a compliance mindset. They want to comply to standards. You and I are in a different business. We're in the improvement or innovation business. So many times the data we need to improve performance is not readily available. I can't tell you how many managers I've met in client organizations who manually have to go into their systems, collect data, so they can make a presentation at the next leadership review. The data you need is inversely proportional to the data that's available. Not understanding how to set a target for improvement. Okay, so we have a performance measure with a gap, and we've broken that gap down into components And with those components, we've identified the most significant problem. So what target do I need to set on that problem to close the gap? Okay, so making that connection between the problem and the performance measure is difficult for people. What are some ways to get around these issues? Well, one requirement we have for every green or black belt team is that you got to have a flow chart of the process. Okay, so I want to see a flow chart. How does work flow through that process to create that performance measure? If possible, get out there and watch the process. You say you got a problem with patient turnaround time? Get out there and watch a patient take a journey through your process. You got slow turnaround time on hiring? Follow the journey of a new hire. But get out there and see what's going on. And then another very simple tool, a lean tool, called the 8 wastes. So apply the 8 wastes. You'll be surprised just off the top of your head how much collective knowledge there is about waste in that process. Then when you're looking at that gap, how do you break that gap down? Well, collect the data so you can break it down 4 different ways. By what, by when, by where, and by who. Because ultimately you're going to want to create a Pareto chart. So if you create a Pareto chart from the same data, but 4 different ways, you got 4 different perspectives of that data. One of them is going to have a big bar on the Pareto. Right, so you want to give yourself the opportunity to create a Pareto with the biggest bar on it. Remember the 80-20 approach. The biggest bar may not be 80%, but it'll be big. So that's what you're looking for. You're trying to separate the signal from all the noise. The Pareto and the histogram are 2 of your key tools. Make sure you use the right tool for the right application. Now, to most people, when they see numbers, they just think data. But the data comes in different shapes. Sometimes it's measurable, sometimes it's countable, or continuous and discrete. So by knowing what kind of data you're looking at, you can select the right tool. But if you don't think that way, you might end up spending a lot of time analyzing data incorrectly. Okay, so know what kind of data you're looking at so you know which tool you need next. Quantify the impact of the problem on the gap. Now, in the gap, I'm always talking about the define step. So that performance indicator in define has my gap. So in the measure step, I want to know if I reduce this problem by so much, how much will it reduce the gap? I need to make that quantitative connection. Then create a SMART problem statement. Stay focused on your problem. It's very easy in the measure step to drift back to the issue you identified in the define step. You don't want to do that. You want to come down, narrow your focus to a specific problem. For example, how much of the target on the problem will I close the gap? So in the define step, let's say we've got a line graph. We've got a gap. In the measure step, we create a Pareto chart. And the Pareto chart, on the Pareto, we have a big bar. If I reduce that big bar, how much impact will it have on this gap? That's what I want to know. That impacts the target that you set. Okay, in the analyze step, This is where we're looking for root causes. We want to identify and verify them. Well, one problem teams have is they're not focusing on the problem. They might focus on, let's say the problem was turnover, high turnover of RNs. They get to the analyze step, they look at turnover of all people, of all staff. They're not staying focused. They're looking for root causes in all the wrong places. Now, some of you may disagree with me on this. That's okay. But when you're looking for root causes, probably should start in one of two places. One is most root causes are driven by procedures or methods. Okay, so you might have procedures that are out of date. You might have procedures that do not exist. Or you might have procedures that are written in such a way where Jobin and I would read the same procedure and interpret it a little differently. Well, what happens when he interprets a procedure a little differently than I do? We produce variation, right? Variations are enemy, so that's not good. So procedures, either out of date, they don't exist, or they're vaguely written. So a lot of root causes come from that direction. So if I know that root causes are likely to come from procedures, why wouldn't I look there first? Now, let's say the procedures are perfect. Then why else would people make a mistake? Well, the rest of the root causes will typically come from people who are not trained. Okay, so especially in a high turnover environment where you're getting a lot of new people, we might take shortcuts in how we train. Or the training material is out of date with the procedure. Right? So we've had a lot of procedures that are updated because of the pandemic. Unfortunately, the training is out of date. And so how are people getting trained to follow new protocols? Then another reason people fail is because they're put in an environment where they have to take shortcuts. Many times through understaffing, leadership puts people in a position where they cut corners, or they'll document the case later. Now they're going to make data input errors or additions. Okay, so if you know where root causes are likely to be, why wouldn't you look there first? That can make you a very efficient problem solver. Now, another very common issue with root causes is confusing the term correlation with causation. So just because two things seem to be correlated doesn't mean there's a cause and effect relationship. Now, probably like you, I read a lot of white papers online. And usually I'm looking, if let's say I got a new client in oil and gas, I'm going to be looking for Six Sigma project examples in oil and gas. And what you find a lot is that root cause analysis ends with a fish pump, nothing beyond the fish pump. In some organizations or some examples, they'll end with a correlation. So they say, okay, look here, we did a scatter diagram, and we have a high correlation between these two variables. Well, here's an example. One example we talk about a lot is, let's say we have retirees. And one thing we know about retirees up north is they like to move to Florida. Well, the other thing about retirees is they get old and they get dementia. But that doesn't mean because you move to Florida, you get dementia. Okay, so is there really a cause and effect relationship there? And another one is, when the temperature goes up during the year, ice cream sales go up. Then in the fall and the winter, ice cream sales come down. Well, the same thing happens with the crime rate. Okay, so if you look at the crime rate in Chicago, in the wintertime it's low, and in the spring it starts going up, peaks in the summer, comes back down again in the fall. So does that mean there's a cause and effect relationship between gun sales and ice cream sales? Not really. Okay. So understanding the difference between correlation and causation is key for teams. All right. Now we get to the fun part. We've just gone through define, measure, and analyze, and we know what the root causes are. So now we need to create solutions. Now, we don't use the word solution until the control step. In the improve step, proposed solutions are just countermeasures. They haven't been proven yet. Okay. So one thing teams do is they create weak countermeasures. So what's the difference between a weak one and a strong one? Well, a weak countermeasure would be a countermeasure where the human can still make a mistake. A strong countermeasure would be when you've basically taken the decision of a human out of the loop. Okay. So for example, how many of you have driver's licenses? Well, a weak countermeasure would be the driver's handbook. Okay. We've all read the handbook. We've all passed the exam. We all have licenses. But how many of us are guilty of actually disobeying a speed sign here and there? No. All right. So, even though we know better, we've been trained, we still make a mistake. So that would be a weak countermeasure. Then we have the intermediate countermeasure. That would be when the system gives us a warning. Okay, so I get in my car, and I get ready to go down the road, and that buzzer comes on for my seatbelt. It's annoying, but I know after 30 seconds it's going to go away. So I know better. I've been trained in it, but I still have a choice. So I can make that mistake. But a level 3 or a strong countermeasure would be one where I can't make a mistake. So as hard as I try, I cannot put that car into drive if my foot's not on the brake pedal. And I can't start the ignition if the foot's not on the brake pedal. It keeps me from making that mistake. Well, why is that? Well, because in the older cars, some of you probably remember this, in my 57 Ford, I could actually turn the ignition when the car's in gear, and the car would lurch forward, right? So dangerous situation. So selecting a weak countermeasure, let's say the root cause was staff was not trained. A weak countermeasure would be trained staff. They can still make a mistake. So really putting a lot of emphasis into countermeasure development over the last couple of years. Not identifying risk. So you've come up with some great countermeasures to address your root causes, but you haven't thought through what could possibly happen as we're implementing these countermeasures. What could be some barriers that we might encounter that would make the countermeasure less effective? So teams don't always think through that situation. And then another issue is not piloting the countermeasure. You came up with a countermeasure, you just kind of assume it's going to work, and you run with it. And if you don't pilot it, you don't have that real world experience and knowledge that you can modify the action plan with. What's been the solution there? Well, over the last couple of years, about 5 years ago, we created a course called Project Management for Lean Six Sigma. But it's focused basically on the improve and the control steps. And some of the basic project management tools that I'm sure you're familiar with are work breakdown structure. So taking a countermeasure, breaking it down into its phases and its elements, so you can see all the moving parts that need to be implemented. Risk analysis, identifying potential barriers that are going to impede the successful implementation of your countermeasures. And then just developing detailed project action plans for those countermeasures. It's very common to see an action plan might have 5 or 6 steps in it for $1 million project. Well, how are you going to manage that? So we put a lot of emphasis on these 3 tools, because what you want is an integrated action plan where you can see all the key elements of the countermeasure. What do you have to manage to implement it? The risk analysis, so you can avoid problems, and an action plan that you can hold people accountable to and monitor as you implement the countermeasure. So this was a major improvement to the quality of teams. Right? And another thing is try to remove the human element from your countermeasure if you can. So let's say you're going to provide some training to staff. Okay. Well, staff can still ignore the training later and do it the old way. Well, then monitor them. Provide feedback. Make sure that when you quit monitoring, that new approach has become a habit. So you've monitored and given feedback enough to where you can rest assured that it's a habit. Now, another example I see a lot in healthcare is hand hygiene. Okay. So I think we all know how important hand hygiene is in the hospital. Do you think staff has been trained in hand hygiene? Do you think you see a sign in the restroom on hand hygiene? Do you think they get reinforcement training constantly on hand hygiene? Well, I had a Greenbelt team. They identified the root cause as hand hygiene. So they made the presentation to the leadership team, and the leadership team said, no way, not possible. Look at all the signs we got. So the team leader says, yeah, but we did a lot of face-to-face analysis, and we found 65% compliance. So that's 35% non-compliance. So we may be reporting very high figures, but the figures may be a lot lower than you think. And these are the 3 different levels of the quality of a countermeasure that I discussed. And then another thing is documenting lessons learned. Okay, so you've done a pilot. What did you learn from it? Okay. Did you learn something that you could modify the final implementation plan and make it more successful? And then another thing we do at the end of the improve step. Now, in our model of DMAIC, at the end of improve, you have not yet implemented your countermeasures. You have done everything possible to prepare them for implementation. So now they're ready to implement. Well, based on the results of your pilot, you can actually determine how effective your countermeasures should be. So each team at the end of the improve step calculates the expected return on investment of their project. And so now they've calculated the expected ROI. Now they go into control. And as they implement their countermeasures, we're actually determining the actual ROI. So you want to compare the expected to the actual, because you want to know if the actual did not achieve the expected, what happened? What did we learn? Okay. And control is where the great stuff happens. We get results. Well, just look online and Google some white papers on DMAIC projects and see how many actually close the loop on results. So failure to quantify results in an effective way. Inability to maintain and leverage the gains. Well, what that means is to make an improvement to the process, you change the process. If you change the process, then you need to standardize the change, right? If you don't standardize the change, performance is going to drift back to where it was when you started your project, right? So standardizing the changes is key here. This is rarely done in DMAIC projects, let me tell you. It's a requirement in all of ours, but just do a little search on the internet and look at some projects randomly. It will typically end with results. What that means is these teams will be working on this project again, and then forgetting about continuous improvement. Now, remember, when you did your Pareto chart back in the measure step, you picked maybe 1 or 2 bars on the Pareto, and you reduced, but you still had 3 or 4 left. And so those are improvement opportunities that you might want to focus on. All right. Okay, so one way to demonstrate results is for every chart that you used in define, measure, and analyze, you do before and after on it. Right? So if I used a line graph in define, I'll update that line graph to show if the countermeasures actually had impact. If I used a Pareto chart in measure, I'll create a new Pareto chart with new data and compare the 2 Pareto charts. If I used a histogram in measure, then I'm going to do a before and after on the histogram. I want to see if I've reduced the variation and if I've reduced the mean. So utilize the same tools that you used in the first part of DMAIC to show results. Standardize the revised process. So if I change the process to get a better result, what do I need to do to the procedures that govern that process? Need to update it. Okay, so if I've updated the procedures, what do I need to do to the people that use those procedures? To train them. If I train them, is it a good idea to monitor them to make sure they're using what they learned? And then finally, I should try to replicate those changes wherever they're applicable. Many of these health systems have 5, 6, 7 hospitals in them. So if they make a significant improvement in one hospital, why wouldn't they want to replicate that improvement in the other 6? I've got one client, a state agency. They've got 67 offices around the state. And they make great improvements in one of the offices, but they won't replicate it. Well, if you're a consultant, that's good news because you get to work with all 67. Okay. But if they replicated it, we'd be out of business, right? ensure the sponsor keeps the leadership team abreast of your project. Now, we made a big deal about making sure in the define step that your process had quantifiable linkage to the scorecard. So here you want to make sure the sponsor gives you some visibility and gives you a chance to present your team's work to the leadership team, showing the impact that you had on a KPI. That's when performance improvement training moves away from being another expense to an investment in people. I've got one client in another country, and the leadership team basically said, well, one reason our empowerment scores are so low is we don't empower staff. So why is that? Well, because staff is incapable of taking action without strong leadership direction. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So as I'm doing my analysis, I was doing an organizational assessment using the European Foundation criteria. I get into the training budget. There wasn't one. All right, so my next point to the leadership team was, I can see where you're coming from when you don't empower staff because they're not capable of improving their process. But one reason they're not capable is they don't get any training. So how can they learn if they're not learning? And then provide recognition. And so we've got some clients, they put on really big recognition events for their any performance improvement, whether it was one of ours or just a random team improvement. But they're reinforcing the concept that learning is good and all of you can make a difference in the success of our organization. Now, when I say compare before and after, here's a very simplified version, but this could be the Pareto chart we had in the measure step. And this was our significant problem. All right, so we got to the root causes of the problem, developed the countermeasures, implemented them. Now here we come a little bit later. We're saying, now let's see if we made a difference. So we collect new data and bingo, the problem got a lot smaller. So now we have quantitative evidence that we made this difference. It didn't just happen because the economy got better. We actually addressed the root cause and we eliminated it. We caused this problem. So we are responsible for this. And because we achieved this improvement, that's what happened to the KPI. The KPI didn't improve by itself. It was a conscious intervention by people using a systematic approach. Many times leaders will say, well, the KPI got better because the economy improved, inflation's down, or people are looking for better jobs, so that'll happen. I say, yeah, but remember, we broke this gap down. And when we broke it down, we created this chart. We focused on this problem, and now that's what the problem is. And you can see the quantitative relationship between this improvement and that improvement. So don't go telling me that the economy got better. We're not responsible for that, closing that gap. The gap was closed because we learned and applied some systematic technique. We've reviewed some specific learning points from DMAIC, but if we step back and look at it from 30,000 feet, what can we glean from this information? Well, one, business problem solving is like any profession. It must be learned. Many of you can probably think of experts who have left their organization, created their own company, struggled because they didn't know business. You see this a lot with physicians. Top-notch physicians, excellent physicians, they create their own practice, they struggle. They don't know how to run a business. So business problem solving is like any other skill. Just because an employee is an expert in a specific area doesn't mean they know how to improve that process. So they need that knowledge on how to systematically improve a process. For permanent solutions require data and standardization. So I told you earlier that in the improve step, we don't use the word solution. But a countermeasure can become a solution if we standardize it and permanently eliminate the root cause. Right? So a solution isn't really created until we standardize the improvement. Otherwise, it's just another temporary fix that you get to work on again another time. The data available is inversely proportional to the data you need. All right, so most organizations are focused on compliance, but that's not excellence. You might be good enough in your industry, but that doesn't mean you're a role model. So compliance is not excellence. Compliance is getting by. So organizations collect data to demonstrate that they are compliant with standards. You need data to improve a process. That data is not easy to get. It's probably there in the system somewhere, but you need to know what to get. So many teams fail because they take the data that's readily available and they try to create a DMAIC project with it. That's not acceptable. So in the measure step, we say, let's identify the data you need, then you go get it. But don't just take what's readily available and say, we did the best we can. I had a team in the Florida Department of Health digging through death certificates. So they go through the records, they go through death certificates, looking for who, what, when, and where. So they could get to the root causes of early childhood deaths. So trying to figure out, why do we have such a premature baby death rate? So go into the data. If they were managing that data on a day-to-day basis, maybe that death rate would be improving each year. Empowerment is driven by perceived capability. So when leaders say, my employees are not capable of improving, well, that's because maybe they're not getting the training they need. So improvement is driven by learning. So if they're not learning, how can you expect them to improve? Learning must be considered a necessary investment. So I think many times leaders look at training as an optional expense that we can make when times are good. But when the budget gets tight, one of the first things to go is staffing, temporary layoffs. If layoffs don't get the budget down enough, what's next? Training. Like Deming said, that's probably the worst thing you could cut. And then compliance to industry standards isn't excellence. That just means you're in the middle of the pack. Or it might mean you're the best of the worst. Your industry may be pretty bad, but you're number one. Right? So look around. Who are role models in the work that I do, whether they're in my industry or not? I had a school system that their records show that they had the best managed school bus fleet in the state. So we're looking at the data and we see the percentage of their fleet that are tied up in spares and what they spend per mile for maintaining the fleet. And yep, they were number one in Florida. But then you compare them to FedEx and UPS and Amazon, they have fleets, right? They're nowhere close, right? So don't confine your thinking to your industry. Look at the work you do and then say, now, who does the kind of stuff that I do, whether they're in my industry or not? Those are your role models. So look for them. Next. I told you earlier that 82% of the students that come into the, starting with Yellow Belt, have never heard of Six Sigma before. So just imagine these people coming into this program. They really don't know much about Six Sigma. Many of them are liberal arts graduates, don't know much about statistics. I had one person come up to me one time in tears saying, please tell me my project won't need a histogram. You know, so these are the kinds of things that these people come in with. So 82% have very little knowledge of what we're doing. Yet they go through the program and they complete a successful project about 96% of the time. And so they learn, they're capable of learning. I had one case just recently, a team member joined a team from within the organization, but it was not in their specialty area. So they were worried that the project might not be relevant for them. They said, well, look at it this way. You don't know much about the subject right now, but I guarantee you're going to learn more about what they're doing than they will. So you're going to have a great growth experience because you're learning these tools and techniques and applying them to an area that you're not that familiar with. So you're going to have to learn a lot. Okay, so Phil gives me a call sometime in early December, and I'm just looking at the data for 2021. These are all virtual classes, either with Microsoft Teams or Zoom. Okay, one of the other. And we're at 94% participant satisfaction. Now, I was worried when we first started this back in March of 2020, if we'd be able to maintain the results we had when we were in the classroom. And granted, we started the first couple virtual classes were in the low 80s, but we kept taking the feedback, started using polls in the sessions, summative reviews, exercises, breakout rooms, and different devices. So instead of the flip chart, now it's the iPad or the smart board, but all of these are integrated with the training. So participant satisfaction is still very high, 88% top box. 88% score on the final exam now. So Greenbelt has a 60 question exam. And now the graduation rate's up to 88%. 88% score, 99% certification rate for yellow belt. Now, AYB, this is advanced yellow belt. It includes 8 hours of yellow belt, the basics, 8 hours of DMAIC, and 8 hours of project management. Okay, so 24 hours of training, 99% certification rate, so very few dropouts. 98% certification rate for green belt, black belt. All right, so if you're coming into a green belt program, if you don't want to graduate, you're going to graduate. Now, you may not pass the final. You'll take a retake at no cost. Your project might fall just short of 80% score. You're going to get coaching. You're going to pass. Okay. So a lot of coaching involved in virtual delivery. And by coaching, I mean sessions between formal classes. Median project benefits, $660,000 per year. Okay, so the benefits coming into control, the typical median benefit is $660,000. Now, the reason I use the median is because we have such a broad range of benefits. One hospital improved the efficiency of the NICU, $7 million a year. So large projects like this skew the average. At one, this is the largest benefit ever, okay, in the legal system. So in a state legal system where they're trying to improve the efficiency of public defenders, $105 million per year. So as taxpayers, we're paying that right now. So we use the median when it comes to calculating the benefits on green belt. But the mean is 1.1 million. So, if somebody says, so how successful are the teams? If I'm in a marketing mode, I'm going to use the mean. If I'm just being frank with ASQ members, I'm just going to say the median, right? And then the median project ROI is 13.5 to 1. All right, so a little bit about us. I think Phil pretty much laid it all out. We focus on assessments, and almost exclusively we use Baldrige, but we use EFQM for overseas, primarily Europe and the Middle East. Okay, Phil, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you.